Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of this video about objective setting and budgeting. And in this video, I'm going to talk about understanding the consumer. So I think the first thing that we have to realize when doing advertisement is that our goal is to interact or to connect with our consumer. In order to do that, we have to understand what stages does our consumer go through when deciding to purchase something. Well, there's many theories about it, obviously, but I really like this one that says that the consumer goes through 6 different steps of its purchase. Step 1 is awareness. Awareness means that the consumer is aware that something is missing, that something needs to be added, right? So, for example, might be the fact that you are hungry, for example. Knowledge is when the consumer starts to do research or to think about different possibilities to meet that need. The third step is liking. So the consumer, starts to think about all the possibilities, and some of the options is going to say, I like these ones, I don't like these ones. So it's a process of keep or elimination. Step 4 is for preferences. Now here the consumer will look at all the available options that they like and see which ones do I prefer. So he's going to start eliminating some and keeping some based on the ones that he liked the most. Then we have conviction. Now conviction is when he starts to believe that certain options are indeed the right one. This all finalizes as one option which will lead to a purchase. Now, these 6 steps can be divided into 3 stages, and we call them the stages of customer purchase. So the first 2 steps, awareness and knowledge, we call it the cognitive stage. Cognitive means logical, means that we think about it, means that it makes sense in a logical sense. Liking, preference, conviction, we call that the affective stage. It's much more connected to how we feel. It's much more connected to our emotions. So typically, as you can see, there's going to be liking, preferences, conviction. A lot of times this has to do with personal choices, and therefore it's not something as logical. Step 6 is purchase, like I said before, and purchase represents the conative stage. Now, conative means that you make an action, you take an action, and it is by far the most important of the steps for a business because it's the one that has a direct impact on the business. So, when it comes to this, how we look at all these steps and how we look at the way that cognitive, affective, and conative work, there's 2 different paths. Now, some paths go with the traditional high involvement option. So we're talking here about products that typically have to spend quite some time or money in order to fully understand them. For example, buy a car, buy a new computer, buy a new cell phone. All these things are things that require certain steps. So the first step we need is the cognitive, where we understand we have a need and we do the research to understand what is the best option, just like I described before. Second step would be affective, so we start liking and giving preference to certain products. So here in this we start to understand based on our research which ones we feel are the best ones for us. And finally we would have the conative, and the conative would lead to the purchase of the item. So first I understand I need a computer, then I start doing research, what is the best computer for me, and I start liking certain brands, certain models, and finally I have an action, I buy the computer. But there are certain products as well that have a very different path. We call them the low involvement hierarchy because it demands really much less involvement from us. Buying a computer, buying a house, buying a car demands a lot of involvement. But for example, buying a meal. You're at school or you're at work and you want a quick meal. You only have 1 hour, so you decide to order a delivery service for food. Okay. Now, in this case, you open the app, you have your initial cognition, so you immediately realize, oh, I'm hungry, I have to eat. And you start thinking, what do I want to eat? What are the options I have? Now you decide that you're going to use a delivery app, so you open the app. Now there's many options there that you never tried. You decide to try one of them. What is the main difference here is that you did not go immediately through the affective stage, but rather you first purchase and only after you experience the product will you go through the affective stage. all right? Some products, you only enter the effective stage once after you actually buy them and after you actually experience them. So one of the steps you need to take is understand, where are you? What kind of product are you trying to advertise? Something that is more high involvement or something that is low involvement? Now, the 6 steps can also be divided when it comes to objectives into 2 categories: communication objectives and sales objectives. Now, sales objectives is also called direct objectives, and obviously it's the ultimate goal of any advertisement is to increase sales, directly or indirectly. And therefore, sales objectives are only related to the purchase step of these 6 steps. Now, communication objectives is about communication, obviously, and we call them indirect objectives. And the reason for that is that they don't lead to sales directly, but rather indirectly. And they will be tackling the stages of awareness, knowledge, liking, preference, and conviction. Okay? So, communication objectives are important because they can lead to sales, but there's always a debate: how do they lead to sales? This model that now I'm going to explain is a little bit of a side model, something a little bit that is related to what I'm talking, but not directly, but I think it is very important. We as human beings, we typically don't like to experience new stuff, all right? We like to take things that we believe are safe. Obviously, many people like to take risks, and that will depend from culture to culture. But even for the ones who like to take risk, a lot of times they want to have some level of knowing that there is certain safety on it. Now, on a typical advertisement, and I'm going to follow the arrows you see there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's a lot of steps here. Typical advertisement states that you do a lot of advertisement, but because it's advertisement, people will have an information acceptance that will be quite low. All right? That will be quite low. So which means that they're not going to believe most of the things that you are trying to say. Okay? So because they don't believe the things you are trying to say, there's going to be also a very low level of cognitive action by the people. So they're not going to be aware, or they're not going to research about your product. And therefore, because not many people are doing research about your product, they're also going to have a very low effect on how they feel about the product. But even with that, with massive amounts of trial and advertisement, some people will try your product. And that's the step 3 that you see there. So some of them will actually try. After they try the product, we follow step 4 because they have a direct experience. And now they know if they like or if they don't like your product. And because of that now, suddenly their information acceptance about your brand or your product is high. They are much more willing to accept what you say because they have tried your brand. Because they are much more willing to do that, then they do more research and they understand better your product, which leads in step 6 to a higher order belief in terms of cognition's action. That will lead in terms of effective to a higher order of effect. In other words, they feel more for your brand. They like your brand more because of the experience they have and the information they now have. And this can lead some consumers in step 8 to become committed. Now, as you can see, this is a lot of work. And most of the money we spend is between step 1 and step 4, because we have to use a lot of advertisement to convince people to try your product. So every time that is possible, we should try that blue arrow that you see there. That blue arrow represents a trial. It represents you providing a way for customers to try your product without having to commit themselves. So this will lead many of them, not all obviously, to try your product and therefore skip a lot of steps. So whenever you see Netflix, or whenever you see Spotify, or whenever you see Uber giving discounts, giving profit, giving free stuff, they're not doing it because they have too much money to spend. They do it because they know it's much cheaper to offer you something like that rather than do the advertisement that it will take to convince you to sign up for that service. So think about it, your product, and try to think, can I give my consumers a way to try my product without a commitment? If you can, then do it. But do it only if it makes sense. There's many industries where this does not make sense. Luxury industries, this does not make sense, for example. All right, the Four Seasons or the Ritz-Carlton, they're not going to give free hotel rooms for you to just try, for example. All right. Next step. All right. So in terms of objectives, like I said, we divide the objectives into two: communication objectives, sales objectives. Now, communication objectives, they attempt at increase the target audience brand awareness and enhance their attitude towards the brand. So we're trying to shift their preferences and say, hey guys, don't consume my competitor's product, but come and see our product, consume ours. Sales or direct objectives, they mean to literally increase the sales. So this is an objective that you set where you always try to say, I want to increase my sales by a certain amount. Now, for me, I always have a sales objective when working with a marketing brand, but a marketing plan, sorry. But there are situations, if you're trying to introduce your new product or if you're trying to introduce your new brand, I think it's much more important to work on the communication objectives than to work on the sales objectives, because it will lead to a much more long-term sustainability. So all this is just to let you know, when it comes to these objectives, there's two very different points of view. The traditional point of view states that sales volume is a consequence of many, many factors, and therefore it's hard to say that communication objectives, how much impact they have on sales, because that effect can be delayed. Sometimes I go to the supermarket and I see a promotion that is interesting for my girlfriend. That promotion or that communication had an impact on me, but it did not lead to immediately increase of sales, but it might lead to an increase of sales later on. The Heuretic view proposes to us that the purpose of every objective is to generate sales, and that sales measures are vaguely right. Yes, I don't know precisely how well a certain campaign did to create objectives, but I believe that my sales increased, therefore it had a positive impact. So to summarize, I think that to create good advertisement campaigns, we have to understand the consumer. We have to understand what steps they go through. We have to understand what do they need to know at each step, so that our actions are the best ones to lead to the ultimate goal, which is to create sales. Thank you very much for watching, and please let me know if you have any questions.